Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move to Town Hall Session 9 on Digital Cultural Heritage and Humanities. Mr Andrew Howard of Australian National University will talk about saving your digital life. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr Andrew Howard.
Sorry, I'm just tracking where my partner is on her flight over here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name's Andrew Howard. I'm the Manager of Networks at the National Computational Infrastructure, which is located at the Australian National University in Canberra. I'm also co-chair of the APAN eCulture Working Group. I believe you saw some of our excellent cyber performance yesterday, and also some of the excellent work done by the Youth Exchange Group, producing 4 high-quality documentary videos in only 3 days. Many of you have heard about both the APAN and TN networks. APAN is the Australia Pacific Advanced Network, and TN the Trans-Eurasian Information Network. The APAN backbone provides the Asia region with a high-speed connectivity which links all of our research and education networks. As you can see from this diagram, we have a number of circuits connecting Asia, all of the countries in Asia, Australia, the US and Europe. The TN network, or Trans-Eurasian Information Network, connects Australia and Europe's research communities, providing a high-speed gateway for research collaboration amongst various countries. What I'd like to speak to you today is preserving your digital life. There are many waves of revolutionary change. Some of those waves can be quite destructive. These waves are quite changing in the way we do things. One of those waves is the internet. In the last 25 years, the internet has grown from an academic research project to a network which now connects around 3.5 billion people in the world. There are many commercial networks and also our national research and education networks like MyRen. Each country has a national research and education network. These networks typically provide a much lower cost of operation and connect all of our universities with a high-speed and secure research network capability. We've had many stages of networks ranging from dial-up through broadband to mobile, through smartphones. As we move forward, we're now seeing the Internet of Things arriving. And of course, the drive towards smart cities. Science and the wave of big data that is approaching us. Our NRENs are vitally important for us. They provide the high-speed capability at very low costs. These capabilities are typically not available in the commercial sector. We also have the capability to research different network options and things like software-defined networks, as our previous speaker was discussing. One of the critical components for our national research and education networks is to link data centres, which provides us the capability to both combine our own resources and the commercial resources available from many commercial players. We need to link science, research and industry. So I hear you ask yourself, how does this relate to culture? Culture brings new and innovative views of the world. Typically, culture is a very creative process. Some other direct benefits in the areas of smart cities and social optimisation are things like disaster management, and also, as our previous speaker showed us, things like traffic flows. We're now all using applications like Waze to find the most appropriate way to work around traffic jams. Social optimisation can be used for things like public transport as well. So if a particular train line breaks down, the train operators are able to message people and advise them in advance so they can make alternative choices in terms of how to best get to their destination. This has direct benefits also for the transport operator in that they know how important it is to fix a particular track, for example. It also has direct relations to energy savings. If people are using things smarter, if we're using less fuel to achieve the same distance, and if we're also saving time in people's lives, these are all extremely positive benefits that our high-speed networks and innovation and societal optimisation provides. The so-called developed world is starting to become slightly older. However, there's an amazing vitality and a great number of young emerging in places like Africa, throughout most of Asia, particularly in the Middle East, and also in South America. The population dynamics are quite inverse to the more developed and older countries. What I'd like to talk to you today is also organisational longevity. The average lifespan of a Fortune 500 company is around 40 to 50 years. So where does that leave us when a company like Google, Facebook or Microsoft end? The only long-lived organisations in our society are universities and religions. As universities, we have a duty to preserve for not only hundreds of years, but potentially thousands of years. Having said that they're long-lived, this is most of the time. We have also seen, since the 1970s, significant destruction of decades of academic and intelligentsia in societies. This occurred in China, in the Cultural Revolution following Mao, and in Cambodia, where several generations were eliminated, all of their universities were destroyed, and much of their cultural heritage was lost. In the modern era, we all have a massive digital footprint. Facebook, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and a whole variety of other applications. We all upload our photos, we share our lives, we have social graphs which connect our friends. What happens to those if Facebook decides to go out of business tomorrow? How do we preserve this fleeting part of culture which exists now, but is always changing and evolving? The sort of assets that we're talking about are massive amounts of digital video, images, and as one of our keynote speakers, Professor Tan, mentioned, genetics and medicine. The genetic data sizes are absolutely massive. In your life, you may accumulate around a petabyte of medical and genetic data. Where is this stored long term? How do we control access to this? How can this information be used in a way which benefits society after we're dead? Let's look at social media and digital nations. Facebook now has 1.79 billion users. It is the largest digital nation on the planet. 1.18 billion people log into Facebook every day. 1.66 billion mobile active users use Facebook every day. And 29.7% of those users are aged between 25 to 34. These are typically our masters and PhD students. And 300 million images are uploaded to Facebook every day. Every 60 seconds, 510 comments are posted. 2,900 statuses are updated, and 1,036 photos are uploaded. 4.7 billion pieces of content are shared daily, which is a 94% increase since last year. At 1.79 billion people, Facebook has more monthly users than WhatsApp. Recently, Facebook purchased WhatsApp. So we're now looking at over 2 billion connected users in one digital nation. Let's move on to the fundamentals of preservation. Typically, preservation has a number of phases. Appraisal, which is determining what is valuable and what needs to be preserved. Identification of those assets, adding identifiers and or descriptive metadata, ensuring the integrity of those archives, ensuring the fixity of those archives. That is, how do we preserve original manuscripts that are extremely valuable and there may be only one copy? How do we characterise those archives? And most importantly, how do we maintain sustainability with an evolving range of technology systems which underpin all of this data? This leads to how do we render it? Is the photo that you've uploaded to Facebook now still going to be viewable on a device in 30 years' time? How many people have had DOS games? And as one of our earlier speakers, Suresh, mentioned, how do we preserve those applications which live on outdated operating systems which have, over time, moved into obsolescence? One of the other things we need to consider is physical media obsolescence. Over time, we've had a number of changes to the devices that we're using. We've moved from floppy disks through various sort of drives, through USB, mag tapes, punched cards. How do we maintain the fidelity of the information as we transfer it from different physical media? And as I mentioned, format obsolescence. Will a document that you created with Microsoft Word version 1 on DOS still be readable in 20 years' time with the current version of Microsoft Word then? What significant properties do these assets have? How do we maintain the authenticity of those assets? For example, an ancient manuscript which has been digitised. Has that been modified in some way? Has there been a political or ideological overlay applied to that which detracts from the original authenticity of the work? How do we maintain access? How do we control or maintain access? Now this becomes particularly important in personal assets. Do you want everybody to be able to see all of your photos? And more particularly, do you want everyone to be able to see your medical records? Now in some cases, while you're alive, these things are quite confidential. But say 50 years or 100 years after your death, if a historian was to look back and want to do research on health at a particular point in time, those records would be amazingly valuable to them to be able to actually look back, both in an historical medical context and also in a disease management context. Also, what metadata or data which describes the data that we're seeing do we use? There are a wide range of metadata standards, many of which are interchangeable, some of which are not. Each discipline tends to create their own particular set of metadata standards. So combining those and being able to search through different metadata in a consistent way also becomes an important issue. Some of the strategies we have for sustainability are refreshing the assets. Even our modern computer systems lose data. There is no real permanence in any physical media form that we have. It's not as if we're using stone tablets which will last 2,000 or 3,000 years. We're talking about magnetic media which is vulnerable to things like solar activity. It's certainly vulnerable to environmental conditions. If stored incorrectly, will degrade rapidly. How many of you have tried to play a recordable CD from 20 years ago and found that it's just not readable anymore? That the dye sublimation process used there was a chemical process and has degraded. So all electronic media has a limited lifetime. So we need to look at how we refresh and keep multiple copies and make sure that we don't have assets stored on degradable and impermanent media. We can migrate from old media to new media, but this has an implicit cost in it. We can replicate data. So one of the key things is we're all vulnerable to natural disasters. A large rainstorm or a typhoon or a cyclone can potentially destroy the only copy of an archive. And in the case of older material and older operating systems, can we encapsulate those? We've now reached the time that we have emulation, so it's possible to run older operating systems within a virtual machine to provide the same fidelity as we originally had. This provides us some solutions to the media obsolescence problem, where you can still keep a copy of Microsoft Word version 1, which can open a Microsoft Word version 1 document, so it is still readable as an emulated operating system. This, however, does bring up some issues of copyright, and if it's allowed to keep those old operating systems. However, as an academic community, we are typically given quite a lot of freedom in terms of maintaining these sort of assets. Some of the content that we need to preserve is audio, film and moving images. Something that is often overlooked is the massive amount of email that we all generate. Once again, a historian looking back in time We're in a period now that few people keep diaries. Few people keep journals. It's not as if you can go back to the old seafarer's journal and find how they explored a particular place. Even more important is ephemeral things like video conferences, where important issues are discussed, but unless they're minuted or recorded, all of that's just gone. Video games, as Suresh mentioned, are once again an important thing. There is great nostalgia in running some of these older video games. Of course, websites, but what about our social media feeds? All of the photos, all of the messages, all of the things we've posted on Facebook. Our computer backups. Things like our scholarly works, but not only our research output, but also the source data that we used to derive that research. Some of these data sets can be absolutely massive, particularly our scientific data sets and the applications that we use to generate our research output. And as Professor Tan mentioned, a growing use of genetic data and medical information. There's another class of digital preservation assets that we need to look after, and that is the intangible, the things we take for granted in our society. Things like women's fashion magazines. Dr. Nurul, our performer in the cyber performance, has specialised on her PhD was an analysis of women's fashion over the last 4 decades, of Malaysian women's fashion, showing the evolution of different styles of dress which reflected the society of the time. Those magazines were not considered as important to preserve as a National Archive activity. They were just women's magazines. But there is absolutely vital research that can be gained by looking back at the appropriately trivial. So in the case of fashion magazines or any other sort of magazines or newspaper, paper is a very fragile storage medium. It's easily damaged. It's not good in humidity. The ink fades, or insects can get in and eat it. So we need to be looking very highly at digitisation of all printed artefacts. Both the old, those single copies of a manuscript that may be held in a museum, and also the contemporary, things like the newspapers, magazines, things that are typically just thrown away, but have a valuable place in our society moving forward. As I mentioned, we need to protect from climate change and natural disasters. In this age, climate change is increasing the frequency of extreme weather events. Any single copy, even in a national archive, is vulnerable. Therefore, we need to digitise and distribute these archives globally. Distributing the risks ensures preservation, even in the case of a collapse of a complete society or country. If there are copies stored elsewhere, then future generations are able to reconstruct the past and the history of a particular country. So, how do we as an academic community achieve this? How many data centres do we need to build globally around the world to store all of this content? Also, as Suresh mentioned, there's lots of spinning disks. So I'm just joking on how much we need to do this, but it does have a cost. Fortunately, we are in the age of cloud services. There are many cloud service providers who can build the infrastructure at a lower cost. leverage the economies of scale, and provide a reliable service. But as I started off with, corporate longevity is 40 to 50 years. Our role as the academic community is as the broker of these services, looking at what is current, what is evolving, and providing the quality control for our academic constituents to ensure that we are taking the best practice moving forward for their benefit. One of the things that is most important, particularly with cloud providers, is the cost of moving data into and out of the clouds. It is vitally important for our research and education networks to have established and very low cost input and output costs for using commercial providers. This is the offset that they provide in terms of having millions of potential customers from our community. And we need the ability to archive, for the archive to adapt to emerging technologies and services. Nothing is stable in the digital world. We continue to evolve. So how do we ensure that we're taking best advantage of the new lowest cost service that's coming along? We also need to consider this as a multi-century or multi-thousand year activity. So as the trusted brokers, our librarians and archivists are the key to sustainability. But we also need a cultural, intangible level of newspapers, magazines, the things that are considered trivial in most parts. We also need to look at how we control access now and how we control release after death. Our current engagement with our alumni typically ranges from primary school to the point where they graduate. Some of us have alumni programs that continue to engage. We are the people who are most trusted by our alumni. As the universities, we are the ones who have a long-term interest. Your university will most likely always be there. Most of us pay in some way or other for these digital online services. How much would we have to pay our university, who are able to achieve an economy of scale, to maintain this for us? How do we extend our engagement from just the point where they graduate to an ongoing, continuing engagement? This also provides the opportunity for a much greater collaboration with our alumni, and our alumni feeling that they still have a far greater connection with their university. Our alumni typically become the rich people and have the capability to provide a bequest to their university to maintain all of this information and to apply their preferences on a controlled release policy. It's also a great revenue stream for your universities. Which brings me to, how do we pay for this? Government support, of course, for our university sector is always essential. But if we're going to be talking to cloud service providers and effectively paying them many millions of dollars globally, we can also approach them for corporate support. But I believe that the alumni-funded model provides the most flexibility. Our graduated alumni, our bequests for data storage could be used to subsidise providing a much cheaper service for our students. So getting them started on this, once they graduate and are able to and are earning good money, we charge them below commercial rates, but a reasonable amount, which covers our costs of maintaining this archive in the long term. This also develops a lifelong relationship between the alumni and the university. If your critical data is stored at your university, you're going to be far more interested in participating and having much more contact ongoing. And I believe one of the most important things is how do we manage the post-mortem controlled release of information? Who would we trust but our university to fully obey and respect when we as individuals choose to release private information? By having bequests from our alumni, we're able to fund the long-term storage of these assets moving forward in a multi-century way. So, in conclusion, the time for us to act is now. We're already seeing degradation of physical assets. There are many single copies of very critical manuscripts, and we saw examples of this at UPM on the weekend with the Youth Exchange, that some of their manuscripts have not been digitised. If a thunderstorm was to break the roof and flood the building, some absolutely priceless information would be lost. All the tools are available for us now to safeguard the past, the present and the future. And we as the academic community are the people who are trusted to safeguard and honour the release of information in a controlled way. With that, I'd like to thank you for the honour of being able to present to you today, and I hope I've provided you some thoughts on how we move forward and how we preserve our digital lives. Thank you.